Okay.
And we are live. Hello, y'all. So we have a guest here from Nigeria. We apologize. There is going to be a little bit of feedback. I think we just have a sound thing. We can't seem to figure it out, which is why we're a little late. You know, this is low tech on my part. I gotta invest in some better equipment. But we have. Oh wait, how do I pronounce your last name?
Maduagwu. Maduagwu. You can just call me Alexandra if you want.
Maduagwu.
Yeah, Maduagwu is fine.
No, I want to pronounce it correctly.
Maduagwu.
Maduagwu. Maduagwu.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's actually it. Maduagwu. Exactly.
Alexandra Maduagwu.
It's crazy. It's going to take a while, but you're getting there. Yeah.
Okay. You know, we're trying to rid ourselves of the colonizer's tongue.
It's necessary. Very necessary.
Yes. But hi everyone. We are here and we are doing our second discussion for Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. And this book, I finished it yesterday, as I was saying. We did part 1 with Jonathan, and this is just a book you really have to meditate on. It just gave me so many things to think about. It really kind of buried itself deep within me, and I really enjoyed reading this book, and I'm so happy that we read it in the book club. So Alexandra is they, them. They are based in Lagos, Nigeria. We have their Instagram in the description box. You can reach out to them because this is going to be a great discussion.
Thank you.
So you've published a book though. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I have not published the book, but I have my most recent essay about time and gender, where I basically just documented my experience with not the whole thing, but a bit about my experience coming to terms with my gender identity and how that has shaped my basically my interactions with my surroundings, considering the climate that I'm in, and navigating a bit of, homophobia, transphobia, and things like that, and my family and other related personal struggles that So that is on my Instagram, my link. It's on my bio if anyone wants to check it out.
I'll leave a link to it in the comments.
Great, thank you. That'll be great.
Okay. Oh, I don't know what that. It's like coming back really loud. Like I hear myself. This is so crazy.
I have no idea. Because everywhere is all the doors and everything shut. I don't know. Hold on, let me try with headphones. See if that's gonna work. Yeah, no, my headphones are unavailable at this time.
Okay. So we're getting into chapter 6 to 11, which is where it starts with the beasts, the spirit identities kind of manifesting themselves after a really chapter 5 is really intense. And you know what? I didn't ask you because Akwaeke is an Igbo Nigerian. I didn't ask you what ethnicity you are.
I'm Igbo as well.
Okay. Yeah. I just made assumption from your last name. And so
yes,
I was like, hopefully they can come and talk about some of the spiritual elements, because there is a lot of Igbo spirituality woven through this story. And obviously in the features the Igbo language, and they don't translate when they use the Igbo quotes in the book.
Hold on. Okay, you're frozen. I lost you for a bit.
Oh, okay.
I missed a bit of what you said just yeah.
I was saying that there's a lot of spirituality, and there's a lot of Igbo spirituality, and there is a lot of Igbo language used, and they don't translate when they some of the epigraphs are in Igbo. Some of there's little Igbo quips when they are talking about the beast the beast bodies and the brother sisters. And so it would be great if you could add some context some cultural context to the significance of like the Obanji and the brother sisters.
Okay. So it's Igbo spirituality, but I would say really imagined in a way, because the concept is an Obanje is a spirit who is born into a child and who is expected to stay on earth for a duration of time, cause mischief, die, and return to the same family in the form of a different child, and die and return. And so the expectation is that there is what they call the Iwa, right, which is kind of a physical conduit through which the Obade spirit can continue to return to that family. And normally, it's believed that the EUY is it's a physical, it's something, a collection of items or something that you can find in, buried somewhere if you do the right incantations or do the right, what's the word? If you follow the right practices, you might be able to track the EUY to the location, dig it up, destroy it, and then prevent the Obanje spirit from returning. But in this book, Akwaeke talks about the EUY as not something that is just one item buried somewhere, but a number of different items buried in the body of Ada. So it's these little differences between what is believed, to be the Obanje experience and the way Akwaeke tells the story of their own experience as an Obanje. So yeah, I think that's the first that's the underlying concept in the story as far as Ada is concerned. And so these spirits are supposedly, it's instead of one spirit, it's a collection of spirits, right? And then Asagara comes forth after Ada experiences this really traumatic experience to kind of protect. Asagara literally translates to Daga, which basically kind of describes Asagara's personality and the role that Asagara played in Ada's life from the birthing. Yeah, right. So yes, that's are there any more? Do you have any more questions? Because I feel like I don't want to just like run through everything, unless like you can stop me at any point.
No, I'm a professional hyphenator. I will interject. I like hyphenate people a lot. But no, what you were saying was really helpful because I don't have any reference for sort of like Igbo religion. So what an Obanje is. And I think it's interesting that it's really is a thing where they come back and cause mischief. But like, what is there a purpose for the mischief they cause?
Is there a purpose? Is that what you asked?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, there often isn't. I think one thing that Akwaeke continues to reiterate throughout not throughout, but like at some points, it was mentioned that these gods don't necessarily have a reason for the things that they do. They just do because they are, right? So an Obanje spirit just does because, they are. There's hardly any explanation to it. It's just like, I think the interaction with the physical and spiritual, right? There are spiritual beings who just act. They don't need to have any human or physical explanation for anything. They just do what they want, which is what the Obanje spirit kind of is. So yeah, that's basically it.
Can you say again what you said Ashugara translates directly to? What does Ashugara translate to?
Asagara translates to dagger, like a
dagger. Okay.
Yeah, a small knife. Yeah.
They were cunning deeply.
Yeah, quite deeply, and I think there was a part where when describing the difference between Asagara and Saint Vincent, and when Akwaeke says that Asagara is forever flirting with the flesh of people's throats, something like that. So yes, I think that was their way of saying, without saying that, that's literally what they are. That's their name. That's their experience. That's the beginning and end of Asagara's purpose, which is defense, offense, wound, cuts. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna read from the. Ooh, that came in real loud. Yeah, so I'm going to read from the syllabus for chapter 6, and we'll see if we can answer some questions together. We'll be going through this. But these translations and like the spiritual elements and context that you're adding is really, really helpful, because I think particularly at the beginning of the book, since we're starting on chapter 6 of this discussion, but one of the things that caught me, and I said this at the last discussion we had, was chapter 1 through 5 was initially really difficult for me to get through. I had to go back and get the audiobook because I just couldn't understand the context. And like hearing Akwaeke read the characters and give, the accent and the inflection and the different, because the Nigerian sort of like speak is different from how we talk in America. Like, what does sha mean, right? We don't understand the importance of like ending a sentence with sha, or like what that tonation might mean. And the beginning chapters, because they're taking their time to really kind of weave through this story and weave the foundation of the story. If you have no reference for what they call it Igbo otology, then it kind of is hard to grasp on without hearing the author's voice. But their voice added so much context, and then obviously you coming in to speak with us is really helpful. And I think it'll really help people get through the reading.
I'm glad to be able to provide as much context as I can. To be honest, it's as much as it is Igbo. It basically, like I said, reimagines Igbo ordinary, which is culture, Igbo culture, in a way that a lot of us were not very familiar with in the beginning. Because I read this book first last year, and I think about over a year ago. And when I first read it, it took so much for me to digest what Akwaeke was trying to communicate in the book. It took a while for me to understand, because first of all, it's a concept that's kind of taboo to talk about. Like if you are Obanje or suspected Obanje, that's stigma. Like you receive stigma for such things. A lot of people were put through several kinds of practices, or taken to church or things like that, because their parents suspected that they might have Obanje spirits in them. So hearing Akwaeke talk about this in this way, saying, yes, this person is an Obanje and this is how it affects their lives, and there is no, there's no apology, there's no demonizing this person for this. This is just this is a person's story of their identity and their experience, and it was really something. It really was.
So is it that that the author is challenging? Because I also feel like they definitely are challenging Christianity, but maybe within their telling and their owning and their acceptance and the way that they give credence and validation to an Obanji is kind of challenging also Igbo culture in the same way that they challenge. Well, Christianity really is an extension of Nigerian culture anyway. Like, West Africans tend to be very indoctrinated in their Christianity. And so like both, this is kind of like a commentary, a pushing back on, all the identities that Akwaeke kind of sits at the intersection of.
I definitely agree. Yes.
All right, I'm going to read chapter 6 it's on page 22 of the syllabus. And so the quote that they put, and I'm sorry if I butcher names, I listened to the audiobook and I still get nervous about saying some of the names that are in this book.
That's okay. I'm nervous about saying some of them as well, to be honest. So it's okay.
Yeah. All right, so Asagara describes how brutal Soren acted in defense of his mother. He told her this story about how much he loved his mother and how he and his brother went and drove nails to the hands of the man who threw stones at her in Denmark. I remembered it when I arrived, the image of the man being held against the ground, his palm forced open, the boys baring their teeth, the nail tearing through flesh and ligaments with metal purpose, the man's screams, the blood bursting. It was true, and me. I like true things. That's a quote from page 65. And so the question is asking is, how does violence influence Ada's social connections? And do you think we show our true selves more often in romantic or platonic relationships?
Do you?
I was gonna say, I think what's interesting about this book is that, like, I think when we think about the Ada showing themselves, it felt like their ability, because I think they're very kind of like, I'm like, is it ableist to say I think they're a toxic person? But also, like, like, would I be friends with them? I don't know. But I also think they didn't hide their toxicity, right? Like, there is a quote in, I believe, chapter 4 or 5 that's talking about you can go crazy in much more saner ways, and that's a lot more violent and grotesque. And the Ada goes mad, but they don't hide their madness, right? They don't hide that they're cutting themselves. They don't hide that they are working through whatever. They might not approach it, they might not talk about it, but they don't, like, at least with their friend group, maybe not with their family, they don't hide it. And so I almost feel like the Ada is a character that is not necessarily vulnerable because they're desired, right? I think especially in, like, heteronormative relationships, we put a lot of weight on this idea of being desired, especially as women being desired by men. And I didn't get the sense that the Ada really was chasing after the male gaze. They just kind of were like, well, Asagara was like doing what they were doing, right? They had the spirit in them that is using the body, right, in a very kind of volatile way. But the Ada in their moments didn't really care until they cared. And so I don't think this book really made me think about how we tend to label people that do certain acts and not knowing at all what's going on through their minds.
Yeah, definitely.
I do want to know if you can talk about when Asagara explains that when you name something, it comes into existence. And there's a lot of reference to the fact that the Ada named the spirits. And so that gave them a deeper, and almost kind of saves the Ada from, ending up killing themselves because of these spirits. Like, these spirits were still kind of reckless and mischievous, but they also, in some ways, wanted to protect and hold on to the Ada because they named them. And so, is there, like, there's a lot of, I mean, obviously in Nigerian culture, as is in much of Black diasporic culture, there's a lot of reverence in what you name your child, and therefore naming someone that has proximity to you.
Yes, there is definitely a lot of importance, I would say, because okay, so I want to reference something, a quote that is towards that is in Igbo towards the end, that says "Otu nne na-amụ, mana ọ bụghị otu Chineke," right? So that means that one God creates, but it's not only one God that one mother gives birth, but it's not only one God that creates. And that's literally what it means. But figuratively, right, the Igbo Ordinani, right, believes that each individual has their own God that, runs their affairs. And it's very important. It's a whole, process and thing for a person to identify who that God is, and the ways to appease that God, or the ways to, commune or fellowship or communicate or connect with that God in order to gain guidance or protection or prosperity or whatever it is that people might want. So I think this was part of that process. This was in reference to the birthing of Asagara in Diada was a process of finding out, okay, this is the God in me, and this is the name of that God, and this is what I should expect. Because the name is so explanatory of Asagara's personality, it kind of it just follows. Like, as you say that this is a thing, the thing becomes, like, it basically takes shape. So that's how, and I completely agree that naming these gods was what kind of kept Ada as sane as she was for as long as she, because it with all that commotion, not knowing who is responsible for what or what's exactly was happening, that been chaos. So yes, that's.
Oh, sorry, my camera went off, but it'll come back on in a minute. It just does that. But the you know, and what you just said made me think about, like, I mean, and I keep wanting to skip ahead to like the end of the book, because the Ada does come to a realization of like their power. But even in the way that you just explained that, it's like, yo, at this point in the book, I wasn't really giving the Ada a lot of credit. Right, the Ada, like, because you have Asagara come out so strong and so like, you know, it is what it is, like, yeah, you know, very sort of like kind of benevolent about, or kind of like careless about everything, but with such a strong like I'm good, so nothing else matters sort of attitude in reading it. But like not thinking about like for the Ada to kind of embrace the brothers sisters that lived within them, and to take the time to really sit with them, even though they go through all this trauma, even though they go through all these acts of harm against their own body. You know, I think this book does a lot of work to really give intelligence to things that, especially in Western society, we're inclined to dismiss. And I imagine within Nigerian culture, even with this idea of going back to taking a hold of being Obanje, right? Which, and I wonder for like people that are non-binary or don't fit into a binary understanding of gender, is there a cultural context where they often are labeled Obanje?
Not honestly, not that I'm aware of, because, like I said, Akwaeke's Freshwater was groundbreaking even for us, because it took a concept that was taboo and kind of explained identity in a way that a lot of us, have felt it. So it was kind of a spiritual process reading it for a lot of trans and non-binary folk, because they could relate on a different plane, maybe not in that metaphysical aspect, but in the experience of it, it kind of gave context to a lot of people's. But just the fact that they know that this is a person's lived experience, the fact that they know that Freshwater is basically an autobiography, but also fiction, it kind of gives them, it helps a lot of people feel seen in a way that most people did not expect.
So moving into like chapter 7, if we look at a quote on page 84, it's at this point in the novel, the Ada is subjected to the influence of various distinct beings within themselves. Asagara laments, Yeshua didn't give up on Ada, which was touching. He started to materialize inside her mind as if he was one of us, as if he belonged there. I don't necessarily want to ask the questions point blank, but I do want us, like, I thought it was interesting because Yeshua is like a loose translation to Jehovah, right? To a name that some people call God, but this is how they're identifying what becomes a very Jesus-like figure. And this sort of melding between Asagara, who has a very distinct Igbo name, and Yeshua, which is very much a commentary on Christianity, and as a character is Catholicism. I just think it kind of weaves in this interesting story. It's not because it keeps the reader from wanting to say, oh, well, they're going crazy because of their ancestral identity, right? That part of the madness was also caused by the significance and the role of this Catholic identity.
That's that I hadn't even thought about it that way, because it's definitely, we would have, a lot of people would have definitely said, oh, just go. The next thing people say when someone is suspected to them one day is take them to church. Jesus will clear, let him pray and all that. So it was very interesting that there was a figure like that who was also involved, who was part of the. So it did. Akwaeke really did something with this book, because it took a lot of tables that a lot of people used to stand on and just shoot them. But yeah, it was really powerful. Really. The fact that Yeshua did not have the power, or the power that people would expect to just expel the spirits from, because that's how they imagine that you can just rip the spirit from the person's body and be okay. So the fact that there was no power to do that was, I think, like you mentioned, very important, very contextual.
Yeah, it was a very savvy and slick way to add commentary. You know, I've never been to Nigeria, but I have lived in Houston, which is like a mini Biafra, right? And now that I think of it, when I was reading this book, I was like, I get the importance of making a commentary against Christianity, because I always thought it was interesting the way in which the little bit of Nigerian culture, and specifically Igbo culture community that I was exposed to in Houston, how everyone would make a big show about whether they were Anglican, whether they were Catholic, you know, what church, not even just that I'm Christian, but much like you have a pride in being Igbo or being Yoruba or whatever ethnicity, you also take pride in going to a very specific kind of church. And there was a big to-do made about who goes to an Anglican church versus, am I saying that right? Is it Anglican versus who goes to like a Catholic church, or I forget what the third Christian domination that's popular in Southeast Nigeria.
Pentecostal. So it's, yes, Christian, Anglican, Catholic, Anglican, and Pentecostal. There is that thing. Most Igbos, you meet either Catholic or Anglican or Pentecostals are, I think, considered the minority if you're thinking about it in that sense. It's just a thing. An Igbo person is more likely to be Catholic or Anglican. Yeah, it's a thing. It's definitely a thing.
Yeah, my first time going to a Catholic church was in Houston with a Nigerian Igbo girl. And funny enough, it was an African American Catholic church, because there's a long connection between Southern Catholicism and jazz music, which is why I agreed to go, because the pianist was a popular jazz musician. Otherwise, I would never go to a Catholic service. But
that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought.
yeah,
Especially the jazz connection.
you know, so I was thinking about your explanation of the Igbo, the gods, right? And the quote that you pulled from the end of the chapter, I think you were talking about chapter 5 or chapter 6 or 7, right? That says there are, you know, you might have to be birthed by one mother, but you are made by many gods. And particularly when the character of Melina shows up, because your explanation of like Igbo gods, it was like, this sounds so much like Santeria, right? And we know Santeria is influenced by West African culture, but it's often made as a direct connection to Yoruba religion and Yoruba faith. But this idea that you might have one Orisha, or I don't mind, I have all the technical terminology down pat correctly, but that you have one sort of god, but there are many gods that can come together and guide you through life. And Melina is this one character who seems to not only be able to see through the Ada, but also communicate with the brother sisters that live within them. So I thought that was a very interesting character.
Definitely was. I feel like there's a lot of cultural context that would have helped me to understand Melina's character better. But it was very important, I think, that Akwaeke introduced another character who could see the other, because it's very important that the person is seen for all that they are, by at least one person, because that's something that a lot of trans and non-binary folk don't have, the opportunity of being seen, because by reason of the climate that we're in, we're forced into hiding and things like that. So I thought it was very important that Marlena was there to see the other in, their entirety. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder, so the question that we asked in the syllabus is, how might the women in the Ada's life influence their life differently than the men? And I think particularly all the women in the book, or at least not even though so much the women, all of the feminine energy, because later on in the book there's another non-binary character that shows up, but everyone that encompasses like a feminine energy was much more thoughtful, and Asagara didn't make an attempt to manipulate them, aside from Ayotin, or however you say the friend from Georgia's name.
Let me see. Itoha. Okay. Itoha. Yeah. That's not an Igbo name.
Oh yeah, no, it's a name I've seen before. And I know how to pronounce it, but I just still second guess myself. All right, let's get into chapter 9, where we talk about somebody's leaving a comment. I'm gonna read this comment. I thought Melina's was interesting because Asagara was upset that no one saw them, even when it was clearly them. Ada names them, but Melina sees them. What's the point in defining if it's not seen? I thought it was defined. But I guess that is true. Like Asagara is upset, but Asagara is upset when the men don't see them. Asagara is upset when, and it's not that they're upset, they're kind of making a very cocky calculation against like how men are just kind of stupid, essentially. He's like what Asagara is kind of getting at. Like, men, you can always sexualize, you can always go after the sex, and men will fall into it, except for, again, the gentle ones. So like the older brother in Georgia who didn't go for it. And so I don't know that Asagara was like upset that nobody saw them, because Asagara never really gives commentary on Melina, but Asagara is also very much so focused on the men, like very much focused on them. What you're saying when the mother when they got caught being in the bed with the little brother, it's always sort of like this cocky commentary that Asagara has about ha ha ha, I almost got caught. But I mean, it just plays into their mischievousness, not towards like, would they care that someone who sees them because they can communicate, because they can connect, sees them, or would they be more caught up on when they aren't seen because they got away with some dubious act? But let's get into chapter 9, where Ewan, the Irish. I thought it was so funny that she ends up marrying a white Irish redhead. Because there's like this thing on TikTok with like all the black girls, like generally black women in America are the least likely to date outside of our race. But there is like this thing about like dating redheads. It's so odd. So it was interesting that she fell into that trope of marrying a redhead. Ewan. Okay, I'm gonna read. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh no, I was pronouncing the name someone sent in, Ewan, the pronunciation of the name in the comments.
I'm going to read this comment. It says, the Diasporic Connection was so written and hinted in what many of us Black folks know and understand. I really appreciate the way Akwaeke wasn't explaining things or writing in ways that explain was great. Yeah, I don't feel like they wrote for the white gaze, which I really appreciate. Sometimes you get into books like this and they spend so much time like re-explaining things, like in like saying the same thing 5 different ways so that everyone who reads it can understand it. And so like I appreciate that they don't translate all of the Igbo sayings in the book, right? That they kind of understand that you are going to come into my context and my world, and you either going to take the time to come to an understanding or you can just leave it alone. And like I love writing like that. So do you want to say something?
No, I don't. I'm just reading the comments and I think nodding. So I think that's what you're saying. That I'm agreeing with what you're saying.
All right, so I'm gonna read the quote from number chapter 9. Ada explains, they talk about Ewan, the man I married, as if he was nothing because he was only flesh, but I loved him and that made him more than human to me. Love is transformative in that way. Like small gods, it can bring you out the prophet in you. You yourself selling dreams of spectacular hereafters possible only if you believe, if you really, really believe. So in loving Ewan, he somehow became a god. And there's actually a quote that comes after the one we pulled for the syllabus that I just thought was a beautiful piece of writing. he made me suffer, but I still cast idols in his name, as people have done for their gods for millennia. I just thought that was like a beautiful way. Like, oh man, we really do get lost in love. Heterosexuality is such a scam, but I love the way, you know, they kind of like address it, that you do like this to fall in love and to love a person. Really, you be out here looking crazy. Pressed. Yeah, so I guess we don't need to answer the questions directly, but we can have a little convo about Ewan and what he represents, if you have any takes on him.
I don't really have any comments on Ewan because, like you said, heterosexuality is such a scam. So I was just reading like, okay, all right, you love him, you married him, all right. So I feel like when the indifference that Asagara kind of had towards him, I think I kind of keyed into that. I was just like, okay, he's a human. Okay, he's white. He's a white Irish guy. All right, that's pretty much all I felt. I didn't understand his purpose, because like Asagara said, he was human, and like how would he understand everything that was going on with Asagara? How would he? It just felt like I didn't understand how they were going to, you know. I guess as I read along, I would find out how that ends and how, you know, it goes, because it just kind of, the first time I read it, I just kind of glossed over the relationship because I felt like, okay, well, I couldn't understand how Diada could hold so many gods and, you know, fall for a, like Aswara said, a human who was just a white guy. But then when, you know, as they go on and Aswara starts to see that he's, you know, also not, you know, just a plain human. He also had his own, how do I explain it? That he had his dark side. He had his mood swings. There was an appeal to him because of the, will I say, duality of his presence. So I think that was interesting. I think eventually.
Yeah, I think Ewan, like, I didn't question. It made sense to me maybe that's just like about maybe the bias of my own identity, right? It made sense to me that at some point that the Ada would engage, especially in response to that very violent rape scene, that they would participate in a very heteronormative relationship, right? And because this is something like, yeah, I have the misfortune of being heterosexual, right? But like I'm a Black feminist, and so I have these radical politics, but I still, like, you're so socialized, right? And I felt like their interaction with Ewan was partly a commentary on how we can know all these things or have all these thoughts about ourselves and how we are different and how we want to live differently and understand the need to be different. And still, because we only have images of heteronormative relationships, that's still what we fall into. And I think part of it, this commenter is saying, Ewan showed how Asagara could not accurately predict or be responsible for the consequences of her actions. I mean, I thought it was interesting because Asagara says, I let the Ada go because I saw because they liked having sex with Ewan, that they were stigmatized. The spirit was a little caught up in the
dick. That's interesting. I thought Asagara let Ada go because Ada loved Ewan. So I think this is an interesting angle. But I think this comment about how Asagara cannot accurately predict or be responsible for the consequences of her actions is really interesting, because Asagara keeps saying that Asagara talks about themselves in a grand light, like they are able to do whatever it is that they want. And this relationship with this white human guy just happens. And so yeah, I kind of agree with that comment. I do agree.
I mean, but like, It makes sense because she went through this really violent experience, and then I think this is sort of like he was giving the Ada the right kind of attention, right? There was like, and I think what attracted them to Ewan, or I feel like I'm saying it wrong, but whatever. What attracted the Ada to Ian, whatever, is that he offered to change for them, which is never a good thing. You never want a person to change for you. You always want a person to change for themselves. But I think it's a very familiar experience, especially for those of us who bother with men, because the bars, they barely exist. You know, the bar is so low for men. And so this idea, like, we feed into this idea that if a man suggests that he's going to change his bad behavior for you, that is desirable, right? Like when we get later on into their marriage, which comes into later chapters, the Ada is saying, you know, he stopped smoking, he stopped drinking, because he had a lot of toxic behaviors. And the Ada was just amused by how he would kind of like tuck in his bad behavior for the Ada, even though it still was expressed in their relationship.
Well, that definitely makes sense. Definitely puts it into context.
Tino is saying, I think on some levels, Asagara loved Ewan for his dark spirit because she gravitates towards that energy, and it is a manifestation of that energy. I mean, I think that is the one person that I do know with DID, with dissociative identity disorder. Asagara reminded me a lot of them. And I also feel like sort of their pursuit of, and not to be like I don't want to be a couch doctor and diagnosing somebody else. So I'm gonna be walk real carefully and try not to be ableist here. But I did get the sense that like they were very, even though they claim to be sexually fluid, as somebody who identified as a woman, they were very invested in their proximity to men. And I think it was because, you know, men are just, because of socialization, much easier to manipulate via sex. And so there was this power dynamic that they could get in sort of being sort of like an Asagara who had this really dark, you know, I don't know what the right language is to explain who they are in the bedroom, but like that, there was a lot of power that they felt they held on to by how they could use the Ada's body with men and being in the bedroom, even though sometimes the men turned out to be very dark and cold themselves. But it's interesting because a lot of the books we've read in the book club have touched on this topic of Black women going through trying to find their identity and finding their value through their proximity to like having sex, and often really bad sex and violent and violent sex with men. But we can move on to chapter 11, and I would love to hear what your take is on Saint Vincent.
I don't know. He was the first time I read it. I felt like Asagara was my favorite, but Saint Vincent was a close contender because I appreciate the balance. So like towards how like the part that said they were complete, the Ada, the beast self, and her saints. That seemed to me like a perfect like balance. The Ada who is fire and cuts, and then Saint Vincent who is calm and gentle, and a masculine spirit. Or well, let me find this the sentence that said basically, well, a masculine spirit. A delicate masculinity was what was used to describe him. But yeah, I mean that was interesting, especially also finding how they balance the occupation of the Ada's existence or body or self or something like that. Finding out that Saint Vincent basically took the dream self, but only because of the limitations of the Ada's body. That was Interesting. Um, that was interesting because I think about how, like, some people, the relationship some trans and non-binary people might have with their body, it might feel like, um, um, it might feel wrong in the way that Saint Vincent's the Ada's body felt wrong for Saint Vincent for the purposes that Saint Vincent wanted to use the Ada's body for. Um, Someone like me, particularly, and that's an experience that I have from time to time. So that was something that made me feel seen, which was why I connected to Saint Vincent in that way. Plus the fact that there was a gentle, a calmness to Asagara's, fierceness. So yeah, that's what I thought about Saint Vincent.
I really like the character of Saint Vincent. I thought they came. I mean, I know the brothers, sisters, and these Obanji spirits are just mischievous, but like Saint Vincent felt like a really tender. It felt like a very tender, warm, and kind place, and that they could never like it. Also, as you know, as a cis heterosexual person, heteronormative person, right? I haven't had to think about this context of like, what does it mean to not feel like you're in the right body, right? I haven't had to think about a lot of the things that would cross a person as they go through their journey of accepting their differently gendered or non-gendered or whatever, however they want to identify themselves, right? And I think it really kind of just gave like it made a lot of sense for me. It made it like, oh, okay, this is the exploration. This is the way it can. I think because sometimes we get like, especially if we have never encountered in our real lives a gender non-conforming or trans or non-binary person, that we don't necessarily understand societally when someone says, well, I'm gender non-conforming, but as a person that we identify as a woman still feeds into very like feminine understandings. It's like, and it's not so much about the way they present, right? Because the Ada goes later on and like has their breast removed, but is excited to wear dresses because they get to live in the body that they want to live in, right? And so it's not that these brother sister spirits create this very binary type of person, but these spirits also allow the Ada to in especially like a Saint Vincent to really very specifically explore their desires and the way they are comfortable in their own body. And I actually think the Saint Vincent gave the Ada a lot of language and understanding. Like the Saint Vincent to me registered as like a, what is it, the word, the people that we don't listen to, the hood healers, they're always talking about leveling up or like ascending spiritually, right? Like this ascension that you come to a higher understanding than other people. But Saint Vincent seemed like a very legitimate ascension mentally. And I know like the collective of these brothers sisters is what kind of drives the Ada mad. But Saint Vincent just didn't seem crazy to me. It made so much sense. And I felt like they were a very warm and forgiving space in ways that Asagara wasn't.
I definitely agree. Saint Vincent made so much sense, especially in the what's the word, when the clarification that Asagara was body and Saint Vincent was subconscious mind. That was, I think, very important because I kept wondering how that was going to, how the physicality of it would work when because yeah, I think that the separation was very important, but also the reference to how Saint Vincent might have would I say manifested in Ada's life when Ada was younger, and how for a while they had this androgyny that people would question and things like that. And that was also very interesting to me because that is also something that a lot of us, like I said, a lot of trans non-binary folk experience growing up, and harassment in the public toilets where they ask you, are you this or are you that? Because you're sensing energies that don't seem to them as what should be. So yeah, that was Saint Vincent is a character that is a god that I would have, I can totally relate to. I'll just leave it at that.
I'm gonna read
I
this
don't want to say.
this comment. I couldn't help but compare Saint Vincent and Yeshua and their roles and interaction with the Ada and Asagara. And actually, that's a really good point, because I think maybe that's why I also like Saint Vincent. Yo, Akwaeke does an amazing job at just throwing immaculate shade at the conception of Christianity, right? And like the idea that, you know, Yeshua is always there, but will never come to you. They're always there. So it's not that you don't pray to them. It's not that like, oh, people are absolutely ridiculous in having any adherence or faith, because they are sort of a god in their own right, but they never care enough to manifest physically. And I thought that was such a damning take. You know, they hear all your prayers, but do they acknowledge them? And Saint Vincent was a personal God, right? Not a God of many, but a God to the Ada, who did have an investment in showing up and being caring, even though, unlike Asagara and Yeshua, they could not manifest in the flesh.
Definitely agree. The part where the other was where Asura was explaining that gods just do what they like, and so for that reason Yeshua is able to manifest but chooses not to. That actually made more sense to me, because than any of the other explanations I got for why I pray and don't get certain responses. Like, I think it was very it was significant to me that the other had that experience where they would talk to God and call out to God and not get the response that they would expect in the ways that they would expect, because that's something I went through as well. I had that phase where I would say, why am I not getting any responses? And everybody I asked would say, oh, you're not listening hard enough. If you listen, you hear a very small voice. And that was, I kept listening and I wasn't hearing. So it makes sense that instead of saying that they don't exist, they don't have the power to, Akwaeke acknowledges that they have the power to show up and they have the power to do whatever. Yeshua has the power to do whatever he wants, but chooses not to. That makes more sense, especially considering that Akwaeke has been emphasizing from the beginning of the book, through Asagara, through we, that God do whatever they want, regardless of that they have the ability to do whatever they want, regardless of your human rules or what you think is supposed to be possible. Or, yeah. So.
No, like I really appreciate the context that you've added. It makes the book like I love having these discussions, because it sometimes you, especially when you're reading things and it's the characters, the main characters in the book are of a different identity, a different cultural background. Like you're reading it and you're wondering, like, am I getting this? Like, is my assumption in reading this correct? Am I reading this the right way? And so I really appreciate the context that you have added. Thank you for joining us. We're going to close out here. You made it to chapter 11. This was great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Jouelzy. I appreciate it's been fun, and I really enjoyed discussing these chapters, because I really am excited about this book, and I love to talk about Akwaeke's books generally, always, because they are the only, not the only, but one of the Nigerian writers who makes me and people like me feel seen the most. So this was really my pleasure.
Oh, thank you for joining us. I really love having you, and you brought so much intelligence and insight to the conversation. So if anybody wants to reach out to Alexandra, you can find them on Instagram. We do have their Instagram linked on the descriptions, whether this is on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. The Instagram link is in the description box, so just read it. And everyone is in the comments thanking you. I'm sure you can see it. You really brought so much to this discussion. So thank y'all.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye. We're going to end the stream here. Deuces.